Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CJJA Positive Youth Outcomes Committee webinar series. I'm Wendy Faulkner, Assistant Executive Director of CJJA. Today's webinar focuses on utilizing the arts for healing and transformation. I would like to thank you all for taking time to participate in today's webinar, and special thanks to Peter Forbes, Commissioner of Massachusetts Department of Youth Services, and Michelle Phillips, also with Massachusetts Department of Youth Services, who put a great deal of work into the preparation of this webinar, as well as our presenter for today, who Peter will introduce shortly. For those of you who might be new to CJJA, we are a national nonprofit organization formed in 1994 to improve juvenile justice systems, local secure correctional and residential facilities, services, programs, and most importantly, long-term outcomes for youth and their families. CJJA represents the juvenile justice system CEOs in all 50 states and various local jurisdictions across the country. At this point, I'm going to ask Charity to provide us with a few technical instructions before we start. Charity?
Good afternoon, everyone. Please use the audio through your phone. Please remain muted. Type your questions anytime. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded. There'll be a link to the audio recording. The PowerPoint presentation will be sent following the webinar. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Peter Forbes.
Thank you, Charity. This is Peter Forbes with Michelle Phillips, who's been helping out with the Positive Youth Outcome Committee, helping organize. I also want to recognize Phil Harris and Simone Gonfalon, who have been basically an ad hoc planning committee for the Positive Youth Outcome Committee, so I want to recognize their work. I want to give Mike, Wendy, Charity, and the whole team at CJJA a shout out for sponsoring this. I'm going to spend a minute trying to set the call up. Some of us had the opportunity to listen to Fabian Deborah at a leadership conference in Chicago within the last year or so. And what my takeaway from Fabian's presentation was that he basically has put a lot of his career into engagement strategies. And I think in order for us to be effective with young people, we have to be able to engage them and get them positioned to listen to us in order for what we're doing to become relevant in that process. And Fabian came in, for me, from my experience listening to him, he came in that door and he's used art as a medium for engagement. He's done more than that, but one of the things that I was channeling when Fabian was speaking was when you go into a youth service center and you go into the gym and you see 10 kids playing ball and 4 kids sitting on the side, those 4 kids need an engagement strategy too. They need an outlet to channel their creativity and their energy. So I'm gonna read an abbreviated bio and turn it right over to Fabian. Fabian Deborah was born in El Paso, Texas, and began his career in 1995 as a member of the East Los Angeles Streetscapers. He was mentored by many Chicano artists and muralists and was introduced to creative expression of all forms, from graffiti and murals to sketching and fine art painting. Fabian's work has been showcased in solo and group exhibitions throughout the United States and abroad, including Santa Barbara, LA, Kansas City, Brooklyn, and Latin America. Fabian served as a counselor and the director of substance abuse services and programming, as well as a mentor at Homeboy Industries in LA for a decade. He then moved on to work as a community director at Arts for Incarcerated Youth Network. He's also a teaching artist for ACTA, Alliance of Traditional Arts, bringing arts to adult correctional facilities, works in collaboration with Latino Producers Action Network as the art director, and is an instructor for community artists and students throughout Boyle Heights. He has now become the executive director of Somos LAarte Homeboy Art Academy, developing his vision to continue to serve the greater Los Angeles area and abroad. I found Fabian to be very engaging, and I hope you do too. Fabian, you're up.
Thank you, Peter, and thank everyone for joining us today. And I'm grateful, and every time people get to join and listen to someone with lived experience speak, it goes without saying how important lived experience when placed at the center. Anyway, so the picture you see there, that's me. That's little Fabian, when I was about maybe a year old. And before I can continue on to what it is that has brought me up into this point in my life as using the arts for healing and transformation, it is important to bring context to what it is that impacted me, because I am that kid. I am that kid that you are all trying to provide service to in one way or another. I was born in El Paso, Texas. I am a first-generation Mexican-American, and I remember the first 5 years of my life in El Paso, Texas were the greatest. My mother and father were loving, caring, with each other, and the household was very peaceful and comforting. Although at times they would have to bring me to my grandparents' home. When they would bring me to my grandparents, I was also raised by my grandparents, who taught me all of the values and morals of what it's like to respect self and respect others. And during this time, my abuelitos were also everything to me, and I can come to them for the consoling and the nurturing that a child needs in order to sustain his innocence. Although, like every Mexican-American family, right, they want to gain the American dream. So both my parents, mom and dad, were immigrants, and they came to Los Angeles previously, and they recognized that LA could be that city that can provide some sense of stability, some sense of opportunity. And I was only 5 years old at the time, and what do you say? What can you do as long as what can you say? You're with your parents, you have not much to say. But I do believe that that's where the disorganized attachment began, because as a kid and not being able to go to my grandparents' house or stay there like I used to, I can feel like this empty space happening as a kid. Just couldn't pinpoint it, but I knew that something was no longer going to be as normal or as comforting as it used to be. So we left El Paso, Texas, came to LA, and we landed in the biggest housing projects in Boyle Heights. Boyle Heights is in East Los Angeles, which is an area plagued by gangs, many gangs in this neighborhood. But I came here during the 80s. I was born in 75. I was 5 years old in 1980. And so from 1980 forward, we were now living in these housing projects. Now, my father was a great man. He did everything he could with what he had, although because of his immigration status, which is now an obstacle, we moved and we lived above these housing projects that you see before you. Now, these housing projects, there's a lot of people, personalities. And then in the 80s, it was during the crack cocaine epidemic. And so I was being raised during the Rodney King trials and how the uprising of Los Angeles. And I remember my father not being able to gain employment due to his immigration status. And so for him, he started to transport drugs. Since we're from El Paso, Texas, the neighboring Mexico City is Chihuahua, which is Juarez. And I remember my father then now transporting drugs from Juarez to El Paso to Los Angeles. And so here it is, my father, great man, the one that I admire, the one that I looked up to. He is the one who I looked up to in many ways. He loved me so much. And I remember that I gradually started to lose my father. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. I knew what he was doing was negative, but I didn't care. All I wanted was his love, affection, recognition, what every child needs and every child wants from a father figure. And my father gradually became this violent, angry man, and the love he had for my mother was now becoming fragmented. Again, I knew he was selling drugs because as a kid, he would ask me to possess his drugs when we would go to the park, and he would then start to instill in me the belief system. And the belief system is what a lot of us have been conditioned by. And the belief system starts with, you're not to cry, you're not to tell, don't tell mom where we're at, police are the enemy, and don't you go sharing of what's happening at the household, at school, because they'll take you away from us. And so these are the things that were being told to me at a very young age. And because I wanted some love, affection, and recognition, then I must become loyal, and I must keep that and listen to everything my father said. I just wanted to be acknowledged. And so eventually behind this, my father eventually was in and out of incarceration. I was growing up in these projects without a father figure. And now my mother in disparity as a single mother, as an immigrant, trying to make ends meet. And all those things were now becoming heavy and distracting my innocence. And then they say to go to school so I can get an education and be all I can be. At least that's what they say. But the impact of trauma was already in place at a very young age. And off to Dolores Mission Catholic School is where I went. And this was right by Dolores Mission Church, where Father Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries was doing his missionary work. Well, at a very young age, when my father would kick down the door and bring forth domestic violence and beat my mother, and as the oldest of my family, I had to protect her. And I realized that in these moments, I would jump in the way and get in the middle of my father hurting my mother. And in one of these events, he grabbed me, threw me across the wall. And I remember that moment when he told me, "You are not to get involved." And he called me all the names of the book. And right there and then, not only did I realize that I was helpless to my mom, but I also became hopeless. And I think that's when everything just started to fall apart. Go to school, distracted. School was no longer of interest. In 8th grade, but the one thing I gotta say, and I really why I'm saying this is because this is where everything was informing my lens. And so as a kid, I discovered this coffee table that my mother had. And I would go under this coffee table with a long drake, which I called it my safe space. And when my father would come and disrupt the household, I would go in there and hide under this coffee table. And I would pick up my notebook and start to create my own worlds to escape my reality. And that's when I discovered art to be meaningful. It gave me my self-worth. It's something that I discovered belonged to me, and no one can take that away. So I brought that gift with me to school as an escape, as a way that for me to cope. But in school, they seen it as a disruptive thing. If you're disruptive in class, you are not to be drawing, you are to do your schoolwork, always being punished and penalized for what it is I love to do, because I was no longer focusing on my academics. 8th grade, a teacher decides that he rips my artwork. And I was just so close into graduating. And I remember I was about to give my mom a glimpse of that dream that we came here to gain in Los Angeles. And so 2 weeks into graduation, a teacher comes by my classroom and my class, and he tells me I need not to be drawing in class. So first of all, the teacher's challenging me in front of my colleagues. He's belittling me. He's putting me on this. He's belittling me, making me feel so small. He's starting to remind me of the man that I love, but yet that I also despise. This man was my father. The teacher says, "You're not to draw in class." So he comes around. I said, "Man, why are you making a big deal out of this, Mr. Barrios? We're going to graduate in 2 weeks, man." And he goes, "Like I said, don't draw in class." So again, he's challenging me. He's putting me on the stage. So what am I supposed to do? Keep drawing in class. So I kept drawing in class. Sure enough, the teacher comes around and he startles me as he slaps his hand on my drawing. He swipes it off the table, puts it in my face, and then he says, "What did I tell you? Don't draw in class." He ripped my artwork. And when he did that, again, I felt betrayed. Again, I felt hurt, and I felt belittled, and I felt like no one. The only thing that I can clench onto was my gift of art. And this man, this teacher, who never took the time to ask me, why is it that I love to draw, was quick to punish me and penalize me and rip my artwork. In that moment, I was so angry and embarrassed because my colleagues and the students were like, "Ooh, what are you going to do now, fool? Ooh." So I get up, I grab a desk, and I threw it at the teacher. Boom. Now the teacher had high blood pressure, so he's three lifesavers throughout the day to control his sugar levels. And I remember throwing the desk at him. He looked like a fish out of water going through convulsion. He said, "Fabian!" Bloop. Now he's passing away before my eyes and foam coming out his mouth. And now my colleague students were like, "Ooh, what are you going to do now, fool?" So I go up to the teacher and I say, "Why don't you eat your lifesavers now, punk? Might save your life." Called him out of his name. And again, Fabian's the bad kid. Fabian should have never threw a desk at the teacher. So they grabbed Fabian by the neck, walk him to the principal's office. And that day, Fabian has to be the messenger to go tell mom that he's no longer graduating. But not once did the teacher get held accountable for ripping Fabian's artwork. Fabian is the bad kid. And so then you say, betrayed by my father, who cannot protect me from the environments I'm growing up on, leaving me behind while he goes to prison. Betrayed by my mother, who cannot protect me from my father. Betrayed by my community, who didn't step up in time of need. And now the school system? So all you have left to say is, F the world. And that's when you start to find yourself getting involved in what we call the environmental vacuum of gang culture. And now I made a decision to join a gang, not because I wanted to, but it's like something that was the answer to my problems growing up as a kid in the projects with no support, no reinforcements, no resources. You know, it's very tough. And then having to carry the burdens of a single mother, an immigrant who has no financial stability, but yet putting it on me like if I'm really gonna pull out some money out of my pocket or something. And so all that just pushes sometimes a kid away. And behind my own pain and my hopelessness is the reasons why I joined gangs. Eventually, as time went on, you know, I started to get older. I started to go into East Lake Central Juvenile Hall. I ended up in the cabs. I stopped to look into the mirror, and I realized that I'm now starting to become and act like my father. By this time, I became a drug addict. By this time, I had a wife and I had children, and now I'm contributing to the cycle, becoming and acting like my father. Very heartless, very cold, and not being receptive to what it is my children's needs. But I could not live with that. And so the best thinking said, you know, you're causing too much pain, it's better that I kill myself. So I had 3 near-death experiences. In gang culture, I slit my wrist once, and I also ran across the freeway. When I ran across the freeway with hopes that someone could take me out of my misery, is when a spiritual awakening took place. And it was only through the grace of God that truck did not hit me that day. And from that point on, everything that I have experienced and been through throughout my life, and the help that Father Greg and everybody, all the people who stepped in and trying their best, it made sense. I went to rehab, got clean and sober, and then came back to look for Father Greg. After coming to Father Greg in 2007, I started to continuously work on myself. I went to Salvation Army Rehabilitation Center. There's where I started to do the 12-step model recovery, and I started to tap into my core, the core of my issues, which is being abandoned, neglected, rejected by my own father, the man that I admired. Once I was able to forgive him and put that behind me, I was able then to start to see things a lot much clearer. Being at Homeboy Industries, I went back to school and I became a state certified drug counselor by the Board of California. And at the same time, I started to pick up my brush and I started to paint again. And as I started to create these beautiful works of art, I started to then travel the world. And first, I had an exhibit at Homeboy Industries and I had a lot of community come. And then I remember saying, you know what, this is what it looks like. I want more of this. And so then I continued painting. Next thing you know, one of my paintings made it out to New York City, another one to San Francisco. Now they want you in Mexico, DF, Honduras, El Salvador, Barbados, Australia, and now I'm seeing the world. And at one time, here I am trying to commit suicide because I couldn't deal with the pain that I was instilling in my children. But I couldn't pinpoint what it was until I seek recovery. Although for me, I was able to see how art also played a major role in my life. And being the artist that I am and the way I paint and create, now through art, I'm able to not only heal, but I'm also ready to reflect to the world of the community issues and the growth and spiritual awakening, removing stereotypes through identity, culture, religion, and gender. And, I'm not just an artist who paints and tries to put his work in galleries. I made it a responsibility. And I made it a responsibility for me to really utilize arts for healing and transformation. As you can see in this picture, that's me visiting my father in Mexico City. He was deported. He overdosed and passed away. He was deported, and so I had to go say goodbye to him in Mexico at that time. And so here I am now, Fabian, the father who has now 5 children and try to commit suicide. But I still recognize that I didn't want to do this to my kids. What made sense to me was that my father wasn't the one causing the pain. It was his own, it was heroin, because I never wanted to cause pain to my children. It was methamphetamine. It was my own pain being transmitted. But it wasn't until I started to tap into that I started to see things a lot much more clearer. And I think for me as an individual, it's like, how do we make this a responsibility, come back to community and be that mirror image that can assist and help and walk with youth, right? And if you see some of these pictures, that's me on methamphetamine there I guess it would be to your left, looking at a screen. That's me at 30. I think I was 30 years old there. And look how I look like I was 50 something. And just methamphetamine was taking my life, you know what I mean? But if you want to keep going through some of the pictures, and then we can get into, and again, this is an image of Father Greg and I, and you know, this is some of the things that happened after I got clean. A lot of great things started to happen, and behind my artwork, behind the fact that I'm able to use like these paintings here, that's an image of my daughter, me and my daughter as playing the father figure with connection from a higher power. These are my three children, my three boys, Fabian, Damien, and Andrew, standing on the east of the river. It's called brotherhood. And so these are the images that I bring forth, not only for healing for self, but also acknowledging the life of my children. This is my daughter, Honesty, embraced by a flower. And here, when they see themselves in these paintings, the fact that I even thought about them as subject matter, it's a ripple effect. You know, it just shines light, because it's, to me, it's like you've been seen. I have acknowledged you. You matter to me. And these paintings, I mean, these are something that you can't get rid of anymore. They're archived. And so these kids of mine are going to at least recognize through this form of art that they do mean something to me, you know. They always did. That's my daughter, Maya, there at an older age from the previous painting. And this one's called Urban Temple. And, you know, here I'm using the landscape of Los Angeles, the bridges of LA, to signify that the urban temples. And my daughter here is an urban temple. And then they say nothing good comes from gang culture. My daughter embraces the bandana and says otherwise. And this one's called Urban Temple. And so this is what I do. This is how I paint. And after being able to, these are my kids, you know, trying to expose them to a better way, to a better life, giving them whatever it is that I couldn't gain due to my father's absence. You know, it's up to me to pick up the pieces of the puzzle where I left off. And I think this is all this information through my own lived experience has given me the lens to be able to now be that father one and be that community leader. And also to make sure that I'm advocating strongly in the voices of the youth. A lot of these youth, you'd be surprised, you know, my struggles were happening in the 80s, and there was a crack cocaine epidemic. Here we are in 2020, and the issues remain to be the same. A lot of the commonalities, abuse, neglect, abandonment, fatherless, motherless, addiction, dysfunctional families, it's the same thing that I've experienced way back when. In 2020, we're still dealing with the same issue. It's kind of like, it just blows my mind, like, wow. You know, we're progressing one person at a time, but I think that's why we're in this work, to try and find out creative ways to really do something about it. And so that's me, my wife and I, and she's the one who, I would say she's my rock. Without her, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. I put her through hell, actually. Elizabeth has been with me since, man, when I was in my addiction, and she had my kids, and you know, there was so many things that I put her through. Until this day, she stood by me and still stands by me. And I'm blessed to be able to get clean. I've been coming up on 14 years clean and sober. I have been able to purchase a house for Elizabeth and my children. My mother says I returned 20, maybe by now 30 years of her life back. And that's my mom, and broke the cycle, and change is possible. And so then with all that, you know, it's not just about me. How do I make amends? How do I make it a responsibility to give back and help others? If I know that I'm in my community and the same issues exist, the poverty, drugs, gangs, violence, then how can I be that beacon of hope in my community to mirror to the young men and women that change is possible, but through a process? And if I have the talents and the gifts of the arts, and people have helped me to navigate through this art world or these opportunities, then it is important that I do the same for others. And so that's when I came up with the idea of Somos LAarte. Now, Somos LAarte, if you can say Somos LAarte, Somos means we are, LA, Los Angeles, Arte. Now, being at Homeboy Industries for approximately 10 years, I wanted to utilize the arts for healing and transformation. And so I came to Homeboy in 2008. And they weren't ready for me then. 2010, I kept telling them about healing through the arts. They weren't ready for me then. And so eventually what I did is I left Homeboy, and then now they came back to seek me out. And they asked me, how will I come back? And I said, the only way is if you adopt my model of Somos LAarte and plug it into Homeboy Industries and give me what I've been, you know, longly fighting for, so that I can really demonstrate to the world what full investment looks like. And what I mean by full investment is really investing in those system impacted, formerly incarcerated ex-gang members who have found their way to be positioned as executives in their own right. And that's who I am today, the executive director of Somos LAarte, Homeboy Art Academy. And now, because we understand that it's a multi-generational historical trauma, multi-generational from way back when, then it's important that I I impact from the multi-generation, from the elder all the way down to the middle school student. This class here is called, and it's an intergenerational art workshop, and it is important for me to be intentional about the workshops that I provide. Most importantly, about story preservation, making connections, finding better ways of communicating with the child, because a lot of these Mexican-American mothers, as well as sometimes African-American, no judgment, sometimes we are quick to snap and react versus be responsive and communicate. And this goes on, if there's something that they were raised. So here, they make connections, take the time to use art, to develop patience, to develop communication, more responsive communicating efforts, and also to feel their worth and convene, and by utilizing the arts. And this here, we're doing story preservation, meaning having the mothers tell those stories, and the youth to tell their stories and connect and find the middle ground, so that this way the healing can continue, and also they can begin to understand one another through various generations. You can change the slide now. You can go on to, yeah. And so also with that being said, we have Homeboy Industries, and this is the youth that come through Homeboy Industries to seek out the 18-month program. And so Homeboy Industries, we have visual arts and then Tricks in a Bag. Tricks in a Bag, Tricks in a Bag is a way that, and music production. So here we also take their stories, their information, help them to begin to move beyond the mindset by learning music production, putting their story on beats, meeting great folks, understanding how to play the notes, not only from their hearts, but also from the piano or for whatever music instrument it may be. And this is what you call the diversion program. And diversion, what it means is that it might not be, you might have some gang involvement, kids that have been already impacted, and you also have kids who are rattling the fence, the ones who want to find a creative way to divert from being incarcerated. So this is the Tricks in a Bag and visual arts. Why it's called Tricks in a Bag is because it's a creative name. Reason being is that we want to be accessible. We want to create access. So if you were to take a backpack and put a computer, a laptop with a speaker and a microphone and a little piano or beat maker, you can literally walk into Skid Row and ask somebody, hey, my boy, have you ever done music? No. Would you like to? Yes, I got Tricks in a Bag. And you will crack your backpack open right there on site and you get to it. And that's where Tricks in the Bag came. And then Tricks in the Bag, it can be visual arts, theater, creative writing, any art discipline can come out of a backpack at any given site, whether it's a park, Skid Row, any location. Sometimes that's how you can engage and build bridges as well. You can change the slide now. And also, it is important that we acknowledge those who have been incarcerated and who are currently doing time and have been excluded from our society. And so, as an individual who too was once incarcerated, as an individual who too has been incarcerated, how do I then go back to the prisons and bring some sense of hope to these lifers, right? And let them know that there is an opportunity for them to come home. So here we do restorative art practices where we really come up with themes that are going to embody some of their childhood memories, traumas, and this way they can reconnect and utilize the arts as the language and the vehicle for them to start to build on those connections, to create those vulnerabilities so that we can challenge the belief system and the code of conduct. And the belief system that has been embedded in us is by the code, which is that of gang culture, that doesn't make room and allow us to show vulnerabilities. So we have it upside down and skewed. And so here, by utilizing restorative arts practices, we can get to that and give them that space where they can actually be themselves all over again. But through the art, they will project that onto the world. And this is a very dear to heart program for me. And I've been there for years, and I go there every Saturday solely because it's not what I bring, but sometimes it's what I take from that institution that keeps me on my path. And so I'm blessed by them and vice versa. You can change the slide. And also, we have the art gang, right? So it's not just about servicing people. And what I've learned throughout my journey, and this, not only in the art world, but just in general, you know, a lot of the times, you know, we call upon system impacted folks to be at the table. And we want to get to understand what is it and what do you think we need to do better? What do you think we can do to really work with you all? And it's not just about servicing. I think to me, it's about investing and developing leaders so that they too can be part of the fabric and be part of the transformation, in a sense, like Fabian, like me. You know, I've been able to find my way. I was invested in, and I become this executive director of this organization that is meant to really help and uplift. And so for me, it's about taking formerly incarcerated folks from the reentry elements and really building leaders. And what I mean by leaders is by getting to the work, getting to the core, removing yourself from the gang and the mindset that has been embedded us, and learning how to facilitate, co-facilitate, finding creative themes through your own personal healing that is going to allow for us to hold space. And in this case, we use a lot of cultural knowledge and cultural arts where we invite elders from our Native American folks, like this lady here you see is from the Tongva, and from the Tongva who are here in Los Angeles. So they start to bring that lens and what is the traditional spiritual arts practices that can help them reconnect with their indigenous roots, which can also redefine and begin to identify and remove them from this gang culture. Not only do we bring Native American art practices, but we also bring African American drumming so that we're as relevant, as true to the population we serve, and then allow them to reconnect in their own way and begin to take those steps into leadership. You can change the slide. You can change it. Yeah. Okay. Take a little drink, excuse me. All right, so now we got the emerging groups, right? So everyone, if you notice, these are kids who are, let's just say, a little bit more stable in a way that they have gotten opportunities, a little bit privileged per se, but these kids matter as well. And so I'm able to develop these emerging groups and integrated learning so that we can begin to remove the stereotypes. For we as adults have made many mistakes and have pointed the fingers on the bad kids, the bad people. You know, those are gang members. If you smoke weed, you're gonna end up like them. And so we ourselves as adults, due to our own fears, we have excluded the gang member or the bad kid. But again, what that does is cause a divide and a gap, and creates a stereotype that these stable off kids are not willing or even trying to connect with these other kids, you know, because of who they are or been told who they are. So for me, it's about intentionality. How do we bring these kids who are stable, going to school, getting good grades, to engage with my formerly incarcerated young men and women so that we can start to understand where all this stems from in ways that the commonalities will happen in the space so that the stereotypes begin to erase and also can each one teach one. And I think a lot of these kids, you know, even if they're privileged or not, I mean, the common pain is like common wealth. I think, you know, we all felt abandoned at one point, neglected at one point. You know, it's just that some live in Boyle Heights in East LA and some live in Beverly Hills, Rodeo Drive. But the feeling is mutual regardless. So how do you bring these people together so there's a dialogue and a conversation for healing and transformation through the arts at one space? That's my emerging groups and integrated learning. You can change the slide. And I think that's it.
Well, Fabian, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. We really do appreciate you sharing your story with us, and then how art has really, you know, changed your life and the way you're going about assisting other young people and young adults as well as family members and really connecting and making better connections with each other through the art. So we really do appreciate your time and help today. We do have a few questions, and I want to encourage other participants in the meeting to submit questions, and Stephanie will get those to me. So I'm just going to kind of start off with a couple of questions, and we'll see what else we get. When you were in a juvenile hall, did you get any support for your art talents? And if so, could you tell us what that support was, or what was most helpful, and how was it helpful to you while you were in juvenile hall?
Well, in the late 80s, early 90s, again, there was no resources in juvenile hall. It was mainly more about punishment. And I think today now we're living in better times where people have strongly advocated for the juvenile halls to shift and change the way their approach. So when I was in juvenile hall, there was no resources. They didn't have no art classes, any of that. And it was just get up, go to school, get your high school, get to your unit. It was very rigid. Mental health, only if you really had an issue, they'll send you there, but it wasn't prominent. It wasn't at the center. But there was one, there was two probation officers, one by the name of Dennis Callwood, DPO2, and Mr. Fernando. And Mr. Fernando was also a DPO2, which is a probation officer, higher ranking, I believe, which were able to go against the grain. They weren't the traditional probation officers that follow the protocol of probation department. These guys really saw me and my talent and my gifts and would go out of their way to bring me art supplies and give me space to continue to create and develop my artistic merits. And to me, that was the way that I was fully invested and connected with these probation officers, unlike the others who were like, you're not to be drawing at this time. Get back to your bunk and da-da-da-da-da. And it was like, man, forget it. So yeah, there was one or two probation officers that took a risk and were able to give me and bring me supplies and you know, see me for my gifts. And so, I mean, now we live in a better time that I get to go back to the same juvenile hall, if not one, many. And when my pre-release work, we go into juvenile halls and camps. Camps are like, you know, a higher level of, I'm not sure if you guys call them camps over there, but camps are like, you know, 6 months to 9 months to 12 months stay. It's East Lake. Juvenile halls are more like the transitional units where you're still getting sentenced. Once you're sentenced, you go to a camp. If you end up in a camp, you might end up going to youth authority as well. And so I go to the camps and we provide our workshops now, and we're bringing forth arts for healing and transformation to various disciplines. And now I'm saying, man, if they had this when I was in juvenile hall. But the most amazing part is that now it's me coming into the juvenile hall and providing these types of services for the kids who do have interest in the arts, you know?
Right. Super. Thanks for that explanation. So obviously you work in the Los Angeles area. Do you know of other art programs around the country that are engaging youth who are in maybe secure settings in art programming? Do you know of other possibilities that people could draw on?
I mean, I think there was this movement called Create Justice, and it was coming out of New York City in collaboration with the Carnegie Hall. And I think they also have been trying to implement the arts for healing and transformation in the East Coast. Create Justice has been a big movement. If you go to Create Justice website, you can find how many artists from all over, from the West Coast to the East Coast, Midwest, have come together under this Create Justice effort to really share our ideas and experiences. Because another thing we do understand is that the laws and the landscape of Los Angeles is not that of the Midwest or sometimes, you know, of the East Coast. You know, the laws are different. Sometimes the populations can be a slight different. Here in Los Angeles, we have prominently Mexican American, Latino, and African American, you know, but of course, if you understand the landscape of the juvenile halls and camps, it's usually black and brown, the majority of it, you know. And so how do you adapt, how do you provide services to that specific population? And then we learned that in other states, it's a different approach, or probation's different. And so You know, it's like finding really what it is. For me, it's like, you know, putting the individual first, the person in front of you, and amongst all these other protocols, criterias, you know. And so, yeah, you should look into Create Justice. I think there you can, it's a good starting point for the East Coast. But that's where, so that's where I would look and do some research there.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks. Let me ask you, given the work you're doing, and you shared, you know, 3 or 4 programs that you are really initiated, you have continued there in the LA area. But these typically funded by multiple funding sources, including the agency, advocacy groups, foundations, the faith-based community. Can you kind of tell us where these funds typically come from?
Well, I mean, we have here in Los Angeles, we have the state, and then we have the county. So, you know, we got the California Arts Council, and the California Arts Council, it's a pretty well-known art institution that funnels lots of money from I believe the state, or it could be federal too. But then we also have Los Angeles County Arts and Culture, and they handle all the LA County, and they're connected with probation. So a lot of changes have happened here in Los Angeles, where now they have an effort called ODR, Opportunity, Diversion, and Reentry, where they were able to take some of that probation money and then put it into the arts for healing and transformation. Not only the arts, but reentry, diversion, and just finding other creative ways to really combat recidivism. And so those are private funders are like, for me, like the saints, because, you know, private funders believe in what you do, give you the freedom to believe in what you do and do what you do best. But when you start working with county and federal grants, that's when it starts to get a little sticky, because, you know, there's not so much flexibility, you know, due to their deliverables and expectations, and you got to meet these marks. And it's kind of like, whoa, you know, it starts to derail you from what it is that you're really trying to do. So sometimes most of the funding comes from private funders, donations, and yeah, we're fair. We play with county and state as well, but the best funding is private donors.
Okay. Very good. Thanks. We have several more questions. If we were in a secure facility as agency staff, and we really don't know which youth have artistic talents and interests, can you give us suggestions on how we might go about determining that? I mean, do we do like an interest inventory with the youth? Do we purchase art pads and supplies and sort of see who migrates to them? Do we get a small contract with an artist to come in and see how many youth sign up for, you know, the extra programming, say after school? What are your suggestions to folks who work in facilities to try and really determination how many youth are actually really interested in the arts?
You know, I think for us, I think the first thing to do is just really understand, you know, like, who is your population? Where is this setting? Who's in the setting? And I think it's important to always invite the youth to co-design and co-design whatever it is that it is you're trying to bring forward. So the youth have the voice. If you facilitate a nice process with maybe folks from the community who are well known for inspiration and motivation, maybe you bring in a guest artist or someone who has been able to successfully, you know, accomplish things in the art world, but who is also who could also engage youth in ways, then that's where it's at, you know. And sometimes the interest is not there until you start to set up the process, you know. And sometimes it's not about being the best artist in the world. It's about just the process. And so the process, to me, it's about how you hold space. What are the ingredients and the formula to hold space? How do we create a space where the voices of the youth can be heard, acknowledged, and seen? And then we as facilitators can reframe, refocus, and repackage, whatever that may be. And then developing a space where they can begin to reimagine what it can look like if we pursue theater, the visual arts, music production, and all these various arts disciplines. But I think it begins with relationship building and connecting. And a lot of the kids that I work with, you know, sometimes they love sports more than they love arts, but at the same time, It's how you hold this space that they will take the risk and challenge and trying the arts. And at the end of the day, they might not want the arts, but it's what happened in the process that they're going to walk away with. And so for me, it's about engaging your community. This is an invitation. For me, what would I do? Here in Los Angeles, okay, if they call me and they say, we want you to come and do a program in Watts. Okay, I can't pretend that I know Watts. So I have to make sure who is the local artist in Watts who have been doing this type of work. And then they say, well, we got a few artists that are already doing that. Let me introduce myself to them. And then I would tell them, check it out. This is what it is they're calling us to do. Would you be open to coming into this space and engaging with the youth and showing what it is you've been doing? So including the community members who are already on the grassroots level, who are doing the work, to hopefully identify folks that will be beneficial for the population to see themselves as a mirror image. And then they can say, okay, so I see you. Oh, I get it, homie. You've been through this, you did that. I think I can possibly go there myself. So lived experience should be a way of engaging. That's what I do. And it's very effective because then kids see themselves in us and us in them,
Oh, great. Excellent.
I hope that answers your question, but I think it's always important to utilize your own community, your community within community, to be able to build those bridges for you and then bring in what it is you may have.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. Start with the talents that you have there in your community, bring them into the facility. That makes perfect sense, absolutely. So we have another question around Homeboy Industries, or maybe even the Create Justice project that you talked about a little earlier. Are they supportive of young people who have artistic talents, who might develop those artistic talents into trades or technical education classes or marketable skills? Any suggestions on that?
No, absolutely. I think that's a very vital question, and I think this is when we talk about community efforts. I think the people on the ground, it's not just up to me. If I'm going to be doing the engagement, if I'm going to be able to, let's just say I come in and I sell to these kids that there is a pathway into the creative economy, then I need to make sure the creative economy is ready for these kids as well, because that's only going to contradict the process that I've set forth. And so then how do we get in front of it? So as the community connection in my previous job before I came back to Homeboy, it was a must that I go call into action the institutions in the greater LA area, such as MOCA, LACMA, the Broad Museum, and inviting them to be part of the solution, because in the end of the day, we are your neighbors. And you guys say you're LA, then there's backyards in the city that haven't been watered. Can you help me water those backyards? And all I'm saying is open the door, take one guy, maybe two, and hold them for an internship so that they can see what it can really look like when the pathway is there and the support. So yes, I have connections with, I'm working with Disney Animation Institute right now out of Glendale, where they're gonna go ahead and bring some of my youth to get a tour, and then they're offering 2 slots for exposure and experience. I've also working with other institutions like Los Angeles Municipal Art Gallery, where we're trying to develop youth to become docents. The docents who receive the people when they come to the museum, so they can be the art historians who are going to elaborate on what they're viewing in this gallery for this particular show. And so, yes, that's also part of the process, especially when we're doing arts. And then we just need to continue advocate strongly for those institutions to also open the door, because we need the end result as well. Not only are we to provide a service, but it's also to create a pathway to position these youth so they too can come out at the other end and then maybe return and also be part of that solution as we're helping others. But what happens sometimes is that some of these criteria and requirements are still exclusive of the populations we serve. We can sit here and give them all the transferable skills, all the knowledge and all the wisdom that they bring, and we can prep them very well. But if the society is ready to open the door and take a risk, then we're just spinning our wheels. And I think it's a full-on responsibility. And so the bigger systemic issue is that criteria requirement that continues to exclude the populations that we serve. That is where like the dead end is at, you know. And so how do we invite those people to revisit that, to help us, you know? So yeah, but they do invest. I'm one of them, you know. I'm from true testimony of what Homeboy Industries has done, not only taking me in to recover and change my life, but also taking the risk to run and do what I do best. And that's the beauty of Homeboy Industries. And I'm sure Create Justice has also efforts, you know. There's many now. So yeah.
Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you going to say some more?
No, I'm right here. I tend to kind of expand on the questions, but I think it's
not a problem.
Okay.
People are very interested in hearing what you have to say. There's not a problem at all. So we know that there's some pretty extensive on research in the area of art therapy, and we were wondering if anything had been done through Homeboy Industries or Create Justice on some of these art programs that y'all put in place. Evidence that shows that these programs do in fact reduce recidivism or stop that penetration of youth going deeper into the juvenile justice system. Can you share any data maybe that y'all have collected over time?
Well, I mean, I think for us, that is always like the 2020 catch, you know, because when it comes to federal funding, you know, there are particular evidence-based data to be collected, and then you have the anecdotal, right, the storytelling ones. And I think right now we're currently, you know, we've had in a pre and a post test, you know, that we give to the youth when we walk into either a park or wherever space, and they do a pre-test, which only encapsulates like their experience with the arts, and questions such as like, you know, when was the first time you ever done art? They'll go back to when they were in kindergarten, and then like, okay, when was the last time you done art? You know, and so because they're also trying to measure like the fact that they take arts from the school system, and so it's just basic questions in that way. We're currently trying to, it's social emotional for sure. We're trying to get a better evaluation behind the questions we ask, and how is it that we can bring, you know, those measurements, right? And that's always a sticky part for the arts. But I wouldn't be able to say. We do have someone right now currently working on these evaluations, and how do we take a evidence base and anecdotal information and merge it together within the arts. But we do believe the arts have been functioning for many decades. It's just that for some reason, that's the first thing that leaves our school system, and you know, traditional art practices. This has been happening for many, you know, decades, and yeah, it works. But I wouldn't be able to give you numbers. But yes, I can probably send something over after this, where I can send you all information to share with the audience of some of these findings and measurements. I have something like that I can share with you all.
Perfect. Well, if you could send that to, you know, Mike, Wendy, or Peter, whoever email address you might have, then we can get it out to the folks who are members of CJJA and the participants on today's call as well. I think we probably have time for one more quick question. And the question deals with, we know that there are some youth who enjoy drawing. However, when they compare their art to a youngster, say, of your talent, when you were younger, they're reluctant to participate. And I think you said it earlier that it's not just those kids who, you know, are true artists, but those kids who have a real interest in art that you want to get to the table. What are some of the ways that you make art accessible to the other youth who like drawing, and it might be a mechanism to sort of escape, you know, for a few minutes or a certain period of time, as compared to those kids who are naturally talented in the arts? How do you bring them to the table, get them to come out?
And I think everything is intentional as you scaffold. Even I think sometimes you got to get those good kids off their horses too, you know what I mean? And humble them a little bit because a lot of the times, you know, these kids who draw great, like, I know how to do this. I've been doing this. And I say, okay, so that's great. Now you're going to now we're going to take you back down to basics. And even though you draw as amazing as you do, we're going to take it back to basics, so that what it does is, because a lot of these kids also feel like they've been taught and been doing great, that they don't need no more assistance. It's in the process. So it's always about scaffolding, starting with something simple from graphite, leading into color pencil, then leading into, but the technical elements will be there, but it's mainly the process and healing that it should be at the center. And so a lot of the times it lends itself, because, when I say, for example, this is a good example, I say, all right, I do a check-in, a 1 through 10, give me a high and a low. If you can be anywhere in the world, where would that be? Questions like that will begin to, provoke doubt and emotion. And then say, today, I'm going to invite you to think about that very, very first drawing that you did. And I know all of us have done one, whether it's in kindergarten or we have done it for our mothers. So today, we want to see your very first drawing. And what that does, it sets the tone, because of course, if you can remember your very first drawing, it's probably the little stick figure with the little house and the sun and the cloud, right? Or something in that nature. And so then what that does is neutralizes, and then it brings some sense of comfort that even stick figures and all these are welcome. And then behind that, you start to turn it up a little notch, and then another little notch. And then you start to bring in various exercises that are doable across the board. We're not trying to do portraits, but we can bring a portrait to you. But in this portrait, so it's all in the scaffolding. I mean, I have many curriculums and many ways of dealing and approaching this, because in the end of the day, the healing at the center, and then the arts, pretty much.
Perfect. Great advice, that's for sure. I think we're really close to running out of time, so I want to thank you on behalf of CJJA and the participants today's webinar. I'm going to turn things back over to Peter Forbes from Massachusetts, who will talk a little bit about feedback. We need your feedback from these webinars so that we can improve them over time, and also to discuss next month's call. Peter, all yours.
Thank you, Simone. And Simone, you did a great job, as usual. Very much appreciated. Fabian, I appreciate your perspective on the work. And I think it's really important for us to hear that and think about ways to engage young people and listen to young people and help them get to the next level of where they want to get to. So your presentation was very different than a lot of what we've had on these calls, and it was very helpful. So thank you, Fabian. And I also would encourage everybody on the call to complete the survey as you exit the webinar. And we are ramping up for an April call. It will likely be on April 13th and not the 6th. And we'll be getting a notice out on that. So thank you for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thank you.